and using AMBAP.json schema. This schema, we developed this schema, of course, to help us define the OpenMRS specific questions easily. So we have this schema that is used to generate the model and fields objects, which are fed back into the Angular formula. Where we are right now, initially when we started, we just have these independent schemas, but right now we have the ability to include other schemas in a schema. So Darius, if we remember, the concept of forms can be a form of forms, can contain forms. So that's where we are, and we're just doing a one-level containment. So we are not really we don't do it recursively, like expecting to have a form containing a form which contains a form. We don't do that. And with that also, we can just take a portion of the schema we want to use in our current form. So in our definition, a component basically is also a form that is just used by other forms. So when we say this is a component, the only difference between a component and a form is this component, we don't expect to use a component to collect data. So it's just a semantic difference. There's no any technical or structural difference between the two, especially at this point. So when you look at the structure of the component, it's basically the same with the form. And we have the ability to version the component and the forms, basically. And this is, we're using the basic OpenMRS features provided with the form, which include the publishing and versioning and the resources. Oh, sorry about that. I don't know what that is. Right. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, and forms and component once published. Yeah, so we have introduced this idea that because we want forms to use components, we need a way of managing the versions and what form is using what component. So we said once a form or a component is published, then it cannot be modified. This is loosely enforced in the UI and SOPs, because otherwise the OpenMRS backend, the API itself does not prevent you from changing anything on the published form. You can always change it. You can do whatever you want as far as the API is concerned. So this is just a convention we've introduced at AMPAC that when we publish something, we don't expect anybody to go around changing it, because then again, when you want to use it for the data that has been collected using the existing forms, you might find some errors since the data was collected using the component that had some specific characteristics that are no longer there. So when you want to view the data, because you're using the form to collect and view data. So that's why we had to do this. And we've developed, so along with that, we've come up with a sort of a small application that helps us to create the forms and components, publish or unpublished forms, update schema for existing forms. It is still in its infancy stage, very basic stuff there. Way forward, we are thinking of building the GUI form builder, because of course editing the JSON schema files is not a very fancy thing to do. So that's all about the presentation. And let's see some of just see the app in action. You don't need to see that. Okay. So this is the app. I think you guys see what I see, the Angular form entry module at the top there. Yep. Do you see what I see?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we have the Angular form entry module, which is basically the Angular-based module that is helping us managing our forms. And we have added the small OpenMRS form management tool, for which, of course, you need to specify the server you want to use to manage your forms and username and password. So once you log in, this app will list all the forms that are okay. Right now, this is very simplistic. It is very empathy specific because the forms that are being displayed, they are the forms that contains the name POC in them or component in them, and it's hard coded. For now, we can always change that to include the text filter here. This filter is for the forms that are already displayed, but yeah, I guess we can always create another one that can load any form you want. But then again, the forms that are understood by these applications, they have to have the JSON schema. So if you want to load the the info path forms, then again you won't be able to do some of the things you are able to do with this. So basically, we've selected few fields, as you can see: the name, the version, whether the form is published or not, the schema action, the view, and the edit. So you can see for the form that is being published down there, ART component version 0.1, you cannot do anything with the schema because it is published. But the others, you can update the schema if you want. And there is a difference between the one that has a schema and the one that do not have the schema. For example, if you look at the third record from bottom, the Empath POC library entry form, version 0.01, it is not published. It doesn't have a schema yet. That's why you have the button that says upload. So other than that, you have the two standard buttons, view and edit. So you say view, it will just take you to a view, a simple view page that gives you the details, nothing fancy there. See the schema. If you want, you can edit this form. At the top right corner, there's edit. And you can edit, or you can go back to manage forms. Until that point, is there any question or anyone who wants to ask any question about the view?
Do you guys have a workflow for having the forms JSON stored in like GitHub somewhere or something? I mean, basically, do you have a workflow where you can version control the form definitions?
No, we are not using. Okay, so we are not using GitHub. The reason we want to use this app, this is actually the app that we'll be using to manage the versioning of the forms. So the workflow is the form, and we have a team called the form and concept management team. That is the one that will be managing the forms. So basically, when you have all the forms that needs to be defined, and you say you have version 1, and when they define it as version 1 on this application, they will say, they will define all the required details, and then they will upload the schema. Then they will say this one is published, and that means it is frozen. The schema and everything will be frozen. And then if you have to have another version of the same form, they'll come to this same app, they'll create it, they'll put the version, then they'll upload the associated schema, and that's it. So we don't manage the schema using the GitHub.
Well,
okay, and just to help me understand, this app, is this app, you use it to manage the forms that are on a production server or a test server or something, but on a server. It doesn't have its own database like of a form hub or form library or something.
We have a server that is called a form server, forms and concepts. So basically, this server is for metadata. So things like forms and concepts and everything have been defined.
But it's an OpenMRS server. So
yeah, it is OpenMRS. Yeah.
So you're basically storing with an OpenMRS.
Yeah, basically that's what we're doing.
Is there any connection between versions? Like historically, we had the intent was that you'd have a form, and then you could have versions of that form. And your phone's ringing again.
I don't know if it's my phone or. All right, sorry about that. That's my phone.
You can have, the intent was that you'd have a form, and then you'd have different versions of the form, and any version might or might not be published. The way things have kind of fallen out over the years is that they're just separate records, and there's not necessarily a semantic connection between, version 1 and version 2 of a form. other than someone inferring by the names. Does your app, does it try to do any kind of recognition of, say you have an AMPath? I notice that you have the version number in the name as well as a separate attribute. Like this one says it's version 0.01 in the name and version 0.02 in the version number.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, ideally, rather than having, each of those is just separate, unrelated records, you'd have an AMPath point of care adult return visit form, and then there'd be, 1 to n versions of that form, and that the API would help you
Yeah.
manage that.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. You're saying the name. Okay. You don't want, you think the name should end at the form, right?
No,
And
I'm
then you
just
have the
saying that
version. Yeah.
historically the intent was that we added version number for the purpose of storing, allowing forms to be versioned, but we never did a really good job of associating those in any kind of programmatic way. Like the intent was that you'd have a form and then you'd have 1 to n versions of it, and maybe that's just because of the way the API is, it doesn't really clearly support the connection between those. Maybe you.
Yeah, the underlying API, sadly, and it's actually interesting that no one has bothered to fix this in quite a few OpenMRS versions.
Yep.
Just it doesn't actually have like a form and form version tables or anything. It's just form and anyway.
Yeah. So it is independent, and maybe you could try to do it in the app. I don't know. Maybe you can find a way to do that in the app. But yeah, as far as the OpenMRS is concerned, they're just 2 different forms.
Yeah, the poor man's version of it would be to say that you have form. I guess, can you have 2 forms with the same name as long as the version number is different, or does the API force you to have a different name?
You can. As a matter of fact, I think you can have a form with the same name with the same version.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the API is very loose as far as the forms are concerned. Yeah.
The poor man version would be to say, okay, everything with the same name, then sort by version number.
Yeah, so the reason you're seeing this version 0.01 is because it's historical, and AMPath has been doing this way, like appending the version to the form. And they've been careful to put the same version in the version field and appending it to the name as well. I think it's also because of the way the forms they're being displayed in the Ligas UI, because the Ligas UI just displays the name. So I think it was difficult for them to tell which is which. So they said, oh, just append the version there. And going forward, I guess we can drop this because we can easily see the version. We don't need to append it to the name. And so the thing is, the different people are working on different things. And when this team was given the task of developing these forms, again, because there is that convention, they just appended the version as well. That's why. Yeah, so far the only way we can establish the connection is the name and using the version field. Then so you can infer from the name that these forms, they are related. It's just that they are different versions. Any other question? All right. Okay. Yeah, so the edit is it's just, you can edit this form if you want. This one is not published. Edit. You say edit, you just get the same view with the ability to edit the form. So you can change stuff there. The interesting thing is when you publish, let's see when you publish what you get. You say yes, and then you have to save. Sadly, you have to save before that can be affected. Okay. So when the form is published, you get a warning that it's a published form. You can only, there are some things you can change. I don't know why this is so. You can modify name and or description. I see. Okay. So in case there's some error you made when you are typing, you can modify that in the description. But otherwise, everything remains the same. Although in this case, anyway, changing these things like names and description is not really a big deal because the UID is the same, and it is the one that is being used to actually tell what form it is. And the important thing here that doesn't need to change, actually, it is the schema itself, because it's the one that is determining what fields on the form and what things are.
And can you unpublish a form simply by unchecking that box and saving?
Yeah, you can do that. And then it will tell you this, well, people usually don't read these things. You want to proceed.
Nice. Nice warning.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of this. Actually, I am the one who implemented this, and I don't know what is the best way to do this. I mean, can you just disable? I mean, sometimes maybe you need to do that.
Yeah. The way that this is something that I think like deleting a repository in GitHub rather than just letting people kind of mindlessly click through dialogues that they probably won't read. For critical steps like that, they'll have you, for example, retype the name of the form or something, just to make it a little bit harder. Like with the message, this is, could cause problems, and here's why, and if you want to proceed, then you can, but you need to type the name of the form or something, making sure the name is visible to them so they know what to type. But if you try to delete a repository in GitHub, you'll see the same kind of thing where it forces you to actually come out of your comatose, like clicking on button state, and actually have to think.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, I think you can improve on that, and
at least you have a warning.
Like I said, yeah, at least we have warning, and this is in its infancy stage. And the good thing is we have a team. The good thing, this app has been, well, maybe some other people can use it, but it's been developed solely for the Empath team. And the team, it's easy to train that team and tell them, hey, once you publish something, then they can always follow the SOPs very well. So we don't have to worry much about that.
Yeah, but
this is something good, right? Yeah.
Isn't the intent to try to share this, or no?
It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm just saying, I guess what I was saying is when we were designing this and implementing it, what we had in mind is the way you're going to use it at Empath. So now that you've brought that point, yeah, it's good to have it so that it can be useful universally. I agree with that. Okay, that's it. So you can just go back to manage forms, and we didn't have a provision to delete forms. And there's something else I think we can add, that is retiring a form in case you want to do it. That's the only thing that is missing there. So that's all for me today.
So, speaking of which, is there any plan or intent for any, like, I know you were talking at one point with the folks from Esaud. Is there any efforts to try to get other people using the form tool?
Yeah, we tried. I think we didn't do a good job of trying to make them use the tool. Not trying to make them, but trying to help them use the tool. And I think they're also very busy with other things going on their team. So they tried, but it wasn't successful. And at this point, I don't know. Is Pasco? Pasco is not on. Okay. So Pasco is the one who was interested to test it. And the last time we discussed about it, he said there are some challenges they were facing. So we didn't find any other time to address those challenges. Yeah, and I think you guys remember there was these other guys who are creating a different schema. Is that Burnley maybe? I don't remember exactly. So there are those guys too. They have a different schema. I don't know where the effort is with that. So
the Bomni team started, I guess, from this schema, and I think made some modifications to it, which are listed on a talk post somewhere, which I can find and paste a link to. They're actively working on a form builder tool for Bomni that uses a pretty similar JSON schema to what Empath has here. There's also a thread about that. It's probably the same thread on Talk.
Is Bomni still using concept sets to do their forms?
This tool is going to free them from that.
Oh, cool.
So, I mean, currently they use concept sets to represent the form structure, but this tool will start to use, I think, the form schema. I don't know if it's going to use the form field tables or just put a JSON schema as a form attribute. I don't recall.
All right, so I think I forgot to show this. This is the kind of the new schema we have after implementing the using of components, including the components in the form. So at the top, you have a name, you have the UID, which is not the UID. You have the processor for the form, and then you have to mention all the forms you're going to reference in your schema. And we adapted this convention of using a ref, which is the UID of the component, and the display. So basically, the display, as far as the processor is concerned, is useless. It's mainly for the humans. When they're looking at this, they can easily tell, oh, this component, this is that component, instead of just putting the UID. That's why we have that there. So other than that, it is useless. So we have that array that is listing all the components or forms you're going to use in your schema. And then if you have noticed, in each component object, there's an alias. So this is the one, the alias you define here, and it has to be defined once. You cannot repeat it. Otherwise, of course, I think JSON is the last one will take precedence. That is the one that is gonna be used to refer to the components, to the sections in the component you're referring to in your schema. I'm not sure I'm making sense. Okay, so if you go down there in the schema, you'll see.
Yeah, you're referring to a form. All right. Is it possible when you reference a form, can you just put the reference above without using an alias, or you're forced to use an alias?
You're forced to use an alias, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it would make sense that that value that's in ref,
Yeah.
if you set your form to that, it seems like it should still work.
To ref.
Yeah, I mean to the what ref is set to. Like if you down below, instead of saying form is PCR, if you said your form is open brace UUID blah 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 display blah blah blah, that
Yeah.
you could use it without a reference.
Yeah, that would be interesting to do it that way. Actually, it should. I think it should be that flexible, but the way it has been implemented, the processor is not that flexible.
Yeah.
So if you just change it a little bit, it's not going to be able to understand what you're trying to do.
It just, I mean, from an intuitive standpoint, it seems like I see the value of referencing, especially if you're going to use something multiple places. But if you're just using a form and you want to, refer to a component somewhere else and you're only doing it once, having to go through and create a reference forms entry with an alias and then fill it in is a little less intuitive. But I guess eventually you don't want humans using this stuff anyway.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's all. Thanks everybody for listening to me.
But I think that notion of how you guys have done components is worth discussing with the folks from Bomni, because I know one of their, using concept sets, one of their requirements or features that they used within that was to be able to embed forms within forms. So I think I'm assuming that they're looking for the same thing when they're creating their form editing tool.
Willa, would you mind either posting something about the components either on Talk, like on the developers channel, or else replying to the Bomni thread that I pasted a link to in the Uber conference chat,
Oh, okay.
and just saying, hey, by the way, Ampath has, we've modified, or we're now supporting this following behavior.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You said you
I don't,
post.
in the Uber conference chat, not
Yeah.
in the. I didn't go to Etherpad. I put a link to the Bomni form designer talk discussion.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah. Actually,
I mean, just either do it directly in like one of the threads where you have where you've been talking already on DevForm, or else here. Another thing about these JSON forms is that I think hasn't Raphael been working on making the Android client, or maybe actually it's a Summer of Code student, working on making the Android client support the JSON form schema. I believe that is the case, and so actually maybe, so there are people actually taking cues from this design and following it. So as you're changing it, maybe mention that.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, if you read, there's a reply from me on that thread regarding the components, and we said that we're going to change it to use the OpenMRS plugin to store the form schemas. Yeah, I guess I can follow up and just say, oh, guys, we just did change this, and this is how it looks like. Yeah, that's great. I'll do that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's quite possible that somewhere in those 35 messages you already mentioned this, but it never hurts.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, even to like paste a snippet or something. Yeah, because it's not. Oh, actually, I don't see where components are. Anyway.
No, it's not anywhere to be seen. Actually, you're right. So I'll just update the talk and just tell them what the progress is.
All right, thanks. Thanks for showing this, Willa. I gotta run now, but this was helpful to see. Thanks.
Right.
All right. So